Okay, hi everybody. I am so excited that you are going to go on this TPRS journey with me. Learning Spanish has been one of the best things I've ever done in my life, and it's because of TPRS. It's been such a fun and exciting and rewarding process. So my hope is to take you on a similar journey. I wanted to make this presentation to give you an idea of how this method works so that when we start class on Wednesday, we can dive right in and get speaking Spanish as quickly as possible. Though I will review all of this in our first class and in the classes as needed. So don't worry, you don't have to memorize any of this stuff. It's just to get you prepared. All right? So I'm going to cover a few things today. I'm going to cover what TPRS is. I'm going to cover the couple of rules that we have. I'm going to cover the procedures that we'll follow in class, and then just some closing remarks. All right, so let's get right into it. TPRS, as you can see, stands for Teaching Proficiency Through Reading and Storytelling. Okay, so let me turn my little laser on here. Teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling. So we will be using, as you can see, reading and storytelling in these classes to acquire Spanish. And TPRS was created by my Spanish teacher, Blaine Ray. He was a high school Spanish teacher and started developing TPRS back in the 90s. And started out with a combination of storytelling and TPR, which is total physical response, where you attach physical gestures to vocabulary to help convey meaning for the vocabulary and help speed up language acquisition. But then with the help of other teachers and Blaine himself working on TPRS within the classroom, it evolved and grew, and the name changed from being total physical response storytelling to teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling, and resembles more of the method that we know today. That's a brief history of TPRS. So TPRS is a language acquisition method. It's not a language learning method. So what is the difference between acquisition and learning? Acquisition is when we have put the language into long-term memory and we can use it to convey meaning, and we understand the language and the meaning of the language. Language learning is where we learn about the structure of the language. We learn grammar rules, syntax, sentence structure, vocabulary, and then we try to use that learning to form sentences and paragraphs and to speak. Language learning involves a lot of cognitive process and thinking. We have to think about what we're going to say first. So there's often a lot of hesitation and a lot of unnatural sounding language when we try to learn a language, because we're using different parts of our mental processes, different parts of the brain in language acquisition versus language learning. There will be language learning that happens as a result of the acquisition process, but TPRS is focused on acquiring the language, just like you acquired English. You did not learn English. You didn't learn a bunch of vocabulary and what they meant. You didn't learn grammar rules and syntax and then put sentences together. You acquired language through meaning and context. And we're going to do the same thing with Spanish. And this is, as you know from your English acquisition, much more effective and much more enjoyable. So it's a language acquisition process. TPRS works by using comprehensible input plus interaction to achieve fluency. This comes from Dr. Bill Van Patten, I believe that's his name, and he hypothesized that comprehensible input, which was made really popular by Stephen Krashen's study into language acquisition, that comprehensible input alone is not enough to achieve fluency or acquisition of a language, though it is crucial. Without comprehensible input, you cannot acquire language. So without both comprehensible input and interaction, fluency cannot be achieved. What is this word comprehensible input? You can probably guess the meaning, but let me make it clear. Comprehensible means that you can understand, if not 100% of what you're hearing, at least 90 to 95% of it. As much as possible is understandable. You understand the input, the sound, that is coming into you. It's coming from the speaker in this case. So that's what comprehensible input means. If the speech that you're hearing is not comprehensible, it's impossible for you to acquire any language or even learn anything. Okay? So you have comprehensible input plus interaction. And this interactive piece, where you as a student is actually responding, is where you're going to gain that fluency. Without the interaction piece, after a very, very, very long period of time, you might start to be able to speak, and speaking will emerge kind of naturally. And that's what happened when you were a child, is you weren't able to interact a whole lot, so it took a really long time, lots of comprehensible input, and it probably wasn't very comprehensible to begin with, for you to achieve fluency. We're going to do it much faster, because we're going to have both comprehensible input and interaction. So I want to make it clear that language acquisition is a slow process at first, okay? Very slow. And it might even be so slow it feels uncomfortable, okay? So just embrace that. That's part of this process. It's going to be very slow. I'm going to be starting at the very, very beginning, assuming that you know no Spanish at all, even if you know some. Okay? And we're just going to build it from the ground up. So slow. Embrace it. Okay? And it takes time. This language acquisition process takes time, despite it being faster than your first language. It's going to be much faster than your mother tongue, yet it still takes time. Okay? And language acquisition, or rather the mind itself, learns, and our brain learns through repetition, 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 but coupled with novelty. So we can't simply repeat the same things over and over. We'll be bored out of our minds. Okay? So there needs to be enough repetition that it starts to stick, yet coupled with novelty. And that's what TPRS does. We have all these novel stories that we don't know what's going to happen next. That allows our mind to remain engaged to acquire all this repetition that we're going to experience in TPRS. All right? So you've got both repetition and novelty. Two sides of the same learning coin, or in this case, acquisition coin. So this is supplemental. You do not need to purchase this book if you aren't able to. This is the student book from the curriculum that I will be using in class. You can get this at this website here, tprsbooks.com. I'll link it below so you can just click the link and follow it. It's only $16. If you live in the States, I don't think shipping will be that much. If you live abroad, unfortunately, shipping is quite expensive. So this book is not required. It's a great book, however, because it's going to have all of our stories in it, and then it's going to have multiple versions of the same skeletal story that will expand and get longer, and they'll also include past tense, a past tense story for each of those. A little side note about that. So we'll be starting with present tense. Past tense comes a little bit later, after about 20 hours or so. We'll be introducing past tense. So if you have this book, then you'll be able to start looking at past tense right away from the beginning. But again, not required at all. Just if you can get this book, I highly recommend it. It also has like crossword puzzles and fill in the gap stuff and questionnaires and stuff that will really, really help with your language acquisition and getting more exposure to the language. So that's the book. Here are the 2 and only rules of TPRS. The first one is that it's the teacher's story. So that means the teacher decides what is and what isn't in the story. I get to decide. It's my story. And that leads into rule number 2. In the story, anything is possible. Literally anything is possible. So that means don't question the teacher's story when it doesn't make sense, because these stories might not make sense a lot of the time. And that helps with the novelty, and that helps your brain to remember what's going on and to learn the language. So just embrace the impossibility of the stories, because in the stories, anything is possible. And if you're like, oh, why does he have that? You know, why does he have a cat now? I thought he wanted a dog. And it doesn't matter. Let the stories change. Go with it. That's part of the fun. Anything is possible. A couple of notes for you. Speak in Spanish if you can, but you will never be forced to speak in Spanish. And if you're not ready or you don't feel confident, you don't want to speak in Spanish, just let me know. Just say, you know, I'd like to pass. Can someone else go first? Can I do it in English? Everything's okay. I do not want you to feel uncomfortable or nervous about speaking in Spanish, because if you feel that way, it's going to inhibit your acquisition. The fancy term for it is your affective filter. You're going to have this barrier between you, this affective filter between you and the learning. So if you ever feel uncomfortable at any time, you can just pass. You can say, can someone else go? Also, you can use English names of people and places, as well as English pronunciation of people and places. Okay, this is not important in your language acquisition process. What is important is that you're getting these verbs in your head, because the verbs are the key to you understanding and being able to speak the language. So we're free to use English names of people and places. Less things to remember. As time goes on and you become more and you process faster, we can start to incorporate the Spanish names for people and places, but don't worry about that. It's not necessary. So there will be some times where I'm asking you as a member of the class to answer with just a word or two. So these are examples of when you can just use a word or two. We have number 1 here. When I want to address the whole class, I will say clase, and you can respond with sí. Number 2 is if I say a sentence to the whole class is going to respond with oh, and really ham it up. Say oh like it's the most interesting thing you've ever heard in your life, okay? And really do. Get into it, because this is going to make it so much more fun for you. If you let that adult mind get in there and be like, oh my God, this feels so stupid or so silly or whatever, that's going to slow down your language acquisition. So let's embrace our inner playfulness and really get into it, okay? Okay, so let me show you what this will sound like. Clase, sí, hay un chico. Oh, el chico es George. Oh, like that. Okay, so that was number 2. When I say a sentence, you say, oh. Number 3 is if I ask the whole class a question and the answer is known because I have already told you, then as a class, your responsibility is to answer in 1 or 2 words as quickly as possible. Please don't use sentences during this time because there may be times where I want to ask many questions in succession to get an idea of where the class is in terms of your comprehension. How quickly are you processing the Spanish and answering the questions? So if we are all answering in full sentences, it goes too slowly and I can't gauge your listening comprehension. So just 1 or 2 words. Let's see how that looks. Clase, sí, hay un chico. Oh. El chico es George. Oh. Clase, sí. So now I'll ask a question that you all know the answer to. So you just answer with 1 or 2 words. ¿Hay un chico? Sí. Correcto, clase. Hay un chico. Clase, sí. ¿Quién es el chico? George. Correcto. George es el chico. Oh. Okay, so it'll sound like that. Number 4, if I ask you a question, but you don't know the answer because I haven't told you yet, this is where the class becomes like a game. And the way you win the game is by surprising me with an interesting answer. Okay? And remember, it's my story, so I decide whether or not that is actually in the story. Maybe you find out that you were right. It's in the story. It's true. Or maybe you find out, oh no, it's not true. Something else happens. Okay? So your job is to try and guess what's in the story and be surprising. So let's see what that looks like. Clase, sí. Hay un chico. Oh. El chico es George. Oh, clase, sí. ¿Quién es el chico? George. Correcto. George es el chico. Clase, sí. George es chico número 1. George es chico número 1. Oh, clase, sí. George es chico número 1 o 2. 1, correcto. Okay, so I've asked questions that you know the answers to because I've told you already. Now I'll ask a question you don't know the answer to. Clase, sí. ¿Quién es chico número 2? Okay, so now you can just guess. All right. I'm not going to tell you now though because it's a surprise. All right. So then there are some times where your responsibility will be to answer in a complete sentence. So here are the 3 times that you'll respond in a full sentence. So if I call you by your name, then you're going to answer in a full sentence. So student actors, people who are playing a character in the story, I'm always going to call on you specifically by your name, by your character name. So if I call your name, then you're going to answer in a full sentence. And don't worry, I will help you if you can't do it. Okay? And if I call on your name and you're not a character in the story, but you're in the class, if I call you by name, then you're going to answer in a full sentence as well. All right, so let's see what that looks like. So we know that there's a boy and that the boy is George. And we have a student in a class, and let's pretend his name is Bobby. Okay, so I'm going to talk to Bobby. Bobby, sí. Tú no eres Bobby. Tú no eres Bobby. Eres George. Clase, sí. Bobby no es Bobby. Bobby es George. Oh. Okay, so now Bobby is not Bobby. Bobby's George. Okay. George, sí. Eres George. And he'll say in a full sentence, sí, soy George. Correcto, George. Eres George. Okay? So George now, not Bobby, Bobby the student, is talking, and he's George. So he answers in a full sentence. So that's what it will sound like if I call on your name directly. The second time you will speak in a full sentence is if it's a describe la situación. And in this case, this describe la situación, I'm also calling on your name. So describe la situación looks like this. George, sí. Describe la situación. So now George is going to describe the situation. He's going to describe everything he can remember up to this point about the story, using his own language that he's learned so far in class. So it could sound something like this. Soy George. Soy chico número uno. Like that. It's a very short describe la situación because we haven't gone through much of the story. And then the other time where you will be asked to speak in a full sentence is if I say clase, sí, describe la situación. Okay? In this case, the whole class is going to describe the situation up to this point. And you can say anything that you can remember about the story. Unless if I specify a specific situation, then you're going to use full sentences. And during this time, I'm going to mute everybody in the class. And you will just talk to your computer like it's me or the rest of the class. And this will give you an opportunity to speak in full sentences and practice what you've learned and really show off the language that you've acquired thus far. And that will also make any solo describe las situaciones that you do easier for you. So that is the 3 times, or those are the 3 times that you will be speaking in full sentences during class. Okay, and now I just want to talk a little bit about having clear expectations for the class, and then a little note on grades. So it's important that we have very clear and realistic expectations about anything in life, but specifically about these classes. So I'd like to invite you to consider what I'm about to say. Remember that language acquisition is a very slow process at first, and that it is a long process. Okay? And it requires some effort, though these classes, I hope, will make it much more fun. So just have very realistic expectations about your progress, because you saw in my video that I took 60 hours of Spanish in 6 weeks. And that is something that you can do as well if you would like to watch the YouTube videos that I did in addition to these classes. However, these classes only meet once a week. So we are doing these classes in real time and we're moving forward. There is not a backlog of these classes. So it's going to take longer for you if you're not supplementing the learning you're doing in these classes with other Spanish input. Okay? So I just want to make sure that that's clear in your mind, that we're doing these classes once a week and that it will take some time. And also, I'd like to invite you to consider your reason why. Why are you doing this? You don't need to have some deeply profound reason for wanting to acquire Spanish. Absolutely not. Just need to become clear about the reason or reasons why you're doing this. So I'd like to invite you to just take a moment and consider, why am I doing this? Okay? And just remember that reason why or reasons, and let those reasons change as well. They don't need to remain the same. They can change, they can grow, they can evolve. Just periodically, I'd like to invite you to revisit, why am I doing this? Okay, and next I would like to talk a little bit about grace. It's my opinion that it's going to make everything much smoother, much more enjoyable if we can allow some grace for ourselves, our classmates, and our teacher. Because we're all on this journey together, and we are all at different places. We all go at different speeds. Sometimes we stop to look at the flowers, or climb a tree, or sometimes it rains. Sometimes we blaze ahead. And it's important to allow some grace for when the judgment creeps into our mind, when the uncomfortable feelings set in, and just recognize that they're there. There's nothing that you need to do with those uncomfortable emotions. There's nothing that you need to do with those judgments when they come up, except to notice them. Once you've noticed them and given them some space to exist, to be, then you can make a choice about your action and what you're going to do. But when we rush to shove aside any judgments, or we rush to feel comfortable again, then those judgments or those uncomfortable feelings didn't get their time in the sun. And so they fight for it. And they fight hard. We all know. So just give them some space to breathe and to exist. There's no hurry. There's no rush. And when we feel that there's a hurry or that there is a rush, we notice that. And then we notice the judgments we have about ourselves. Oh, I should know better. I'm an adult. I should be better at all of this. And we just witness that and notice it. Oh, that's interesting. I'm doing that again for the 1,000th time. And we still give it space, let it be, and let it pass on. And when someone does something or says something or we judge something in the class, we just notice that, have a bit of curiosity of like, wow, that's really judgmental. And I don't need to judge myself for being that judgmental. I can just accept that I had a very strong judgment and I'm just going to let it pass. All right? So, this is what you get when you're my student. All right. So I hope that this has been very helpful for you. Please feel free to ask me any questions that you have, and you can post them below so that everyone can see your questions, because I guarantee that if you have this question, someone's going to have either the same question or a question very similar, or maybe they didn't even know that they had that question. But when they read it and they see the response, they're like, "Oh yeah, that's good to know." So please ask. So I will see you all in class on Wednesday, the 19th at 7:30 Korean Standard Time, which if you're in the Central Time Zone, I believe it's 5:30 a.m. your time, but just double check on that to make sure. And I will send out the Zoom link and everything onto the Facebook group so that you can get that. All right, I will see you. Adios.